Thank you for the introduction. This is a joint work with Ras and Maaz, both from University of Washington. It's hard to imagine a web-based application that doesn't write any log file. Big amount of log files are needed for various types of data analytics functions that, for instance, can run and reveal safety and security bugs. The bottleneck is performance. Even the data is typically split physically and located on different nodes of the network, and given the fact that network bit bandwidth is typically low and the segments could depend on each other, this all require the function to proceed linearly by looking at the first segment and the second until the end. As a consequence, there's a long processing time and a long waiting time because each segment, each function, before looking at the segment, should receive the inputs produced by the preceding functions or preceding segments. We want to eliminate waiting time, we want to break the dependencies, and we want to run the processing over each segment completely simultaneously. Clearly, in this picture, the new code should be replaced, should go instead of the old code, because the original function simply cannot suit this wonderful picture. And obviously, the new merge function should be added in order to get the partial results by all threads and compute something final to deliver to the user. In this talk, I'll be looking at our single-pass array processing programs, and as an example, look at the simple function which calculates the maximal distance between ones. It's a simple C++ implementation which takes a file with zeros and ones as input and looks at each element sequentially and just calculates the longest sequence of zeros. So in this example, the longest sequence has 4 elements, and therefore the final result is just 4. Look at another scenario where the data is split into 3 chunks. And in order to run the original function, we need to look at each of the chunks separately. First, look at the first segment, then proceed to the second segment, and finally to the last segment. This is completely sequential. For parallelization, we need to make sure our processing function doesn't depend on the results of the other functions, of the other threads. So clearly, for the first segment, this requirement is fulfilled. So that's why we can use the results produced after processing of the original function over the first segment. That's not the case for the remaining segments. So we actually need to do some kind of other analytics and to produce something else in order to make it parallel. Given, for instance, this particular example, it's easy to observe that the second segment contains only 3 zeros and no 1, but the last segment has only 1 zero before the first one. Actually, this information could be just enough to update the values produced after processing the first segment using the original function. Well, it's actually kind of straightforward. So 3 zeros from the second guy plus 1 zero of the last guy. So in total, it's 4 zeros. And actually, the final result is 4. The same thing again. This is the code that computes it. Don't try to read it. One thing to mention, which is important, that the code is produced based on the original function with the new functionality added to it. So there are 2 variables, and the code that computes the values of these variables. Importantly, there's also efficient serial merge function which takes these values and produces the final result. Well, writing this function manually could be tedious and error-prone. That's why we propose to use program synthesis. Our key insight is actually logically resplit each segment into a prefix and a suffix. You may remember actually from this example, you can actually even guess what's the prefix and the suffix, and it's completely determined by the first appearance of element 1. So, but for the second guy, the guy in the middle, there is no 1 at all, so we conveniently decide that the whole segment is actually our prefix. Knowledge about prefix and suffix somehow computed, so gives us actually the rule how we can synthesize the new code. And this is the most important thing. Given the prefix, synthesize the new function which operates on the prefix. Given the suffix, reuse the existing code which is given for us as a spec, and anyway, independently on prefix and suffix, resynthesize merge from scratch. These are the 3 things we should remember. And these three things give rise to three parallelization scenarios which we consider in our paper. The first segment, the first strategy is the case where the all prefixes for all segments, for all data, is empty. Well, what should we do in this case? Looking at the red box, so no, empty prefix, no new processing function. So all processing function which is given as spec is good enough. We just need to synthesize merge. Examples, well, you might remember from the first talk of the session, is average, max, mean, delta between max and mean, and so on. The second case, if the prefix exists, but it's so much minimal, and actually it's kind of fixed, so only one element for each segment, or two elements, and so on. In this case, we need to synthesize the new code, but it's applicable on just a very small number of elements. And examples of such tasks that can be parallelized using this strategy is sortedness and alternation. Also should remember from the first talk. The worst case scenario and our third parallelization scenario is the case where we don't know if there is maybe the whole segment is a prefix, or we don't know where it starts and where it ends. So it's actually our motivating example. We need to find the prefix, the boundary each time for the new segment. So in this case, in the worst case, we need to synthesize a lot. In our approach called gradual synthesis, we walk through these three polarization strategies gradually. So we first consider the first scenario and try to synthesize the implementation, which is actually quite simple. If it doesn't work, we try to move to complication and try to synthesize the parallel implementation using this second strategy. And if it doesn't work, go for the worst case scenario. As for synthesis, we use a widely known and commonly used approach called counterexample guided inductive synthesis, which is basically has a pool of candidates, enumerates the pool, gets the candidate, and verifies if the candidate is equivalent to up to the serial program, which is our specification. So checking if the candidate meets specification. In our case, is just checking equivalence between two programs. Since we are working with loops and since we are working with arrays, for efficiency and for the finiteness of the search space, we must bound the size, the maximal length of the arrays. But definitely it doesn't guarantee soundness in the unbounded case. That's why we actually have a nice and very important step of checking equivalence, which also works as certification of the solution provided by GraSSP. I will cover it at the end of the talk. But before that, I must mention that our approach is also template-based. So templates are partially completed blocks of code that we deliver, which we contribute in this work, that actually correspond to particular spots of the parallelization strategies, and that can be reused for the task of the interest. So I will show them in the picture. The very first scenario, very simple, no new code for the processing function, just need to synthesize merge. So that's why we just use templates for merge, which are quite simple, max, mean, count, and sum. If it doesn't work, we proceed to the second scenario, where we have constant prefix, and we also use the same templates for merge. And additionally, we calculate in prefix and we consider the templates for prefixes of size 1, 2, 3, and so on. If it doesn't work, we go to the worst case scenario, where we need to synthesize the split function. We need to synthesize the code that computes prefixes for each segment individually. In this case, we actually have a very nice template, very simple template, but it's run in the loop. So proceed from the first element to the last element, we are checking if this element is equal or not equal to some constant. So this template works very nice. Finally, for the most interesting cases, there are many templates. So all of them are available, and all of them actually about linear arithmetic. So they could be actually anything. The glue code between new code and the old code is basically if and else operator. Very easy. One of the most important steps in synthesis is assuring that the solution is sound. So for any possible input, the result produced by the serial program is equivalent to the result produced by the parallel program. So in this case, we use constraint horn clauses. This is the automated decision procedure especially designed to deal with unbounded loops and recursion. So what we do, we encode both serial program and the parallel program into a single system of constraint horn clauses, and we add the equivalence constraint, and we ask the decision procedure to solve it for satisfiability. So in this case, we don't care about, so if it actually is solvable, then we don't care about any bounds, and for any big array or any big list, any big stream of data as you wish, so it's verified and can be used. The only thing we should still care is the bounded number of threads or processors, so, but it can be taken more reasonably large, right? Example, just to give you a brief example of how the horn system looks like. So if you're familiar with constraint logic programming, you can read it very quickly. So it's just, well, recursion, right? So for each recurrent relation, we have a base case and we have an inductive case. Well, these two rules, they describe the serial computation. Another two rules describe the parallel computation. And finally, in the same system, there's a fifth rule, which tells, well, we run serial, we run parallel, so we assume the inputs is the same. Then we should make sure that the outputs is the same. Well, it's actually append and merge. So it's fine if you don't understand what's written here. It's not supposed to be human readable. More importantly, it should be readable by the automatic precision procedure, which actually takes it and just delivers us the result, SAT or unsat. If it's SAT, then the authorization is correct. That's what we should take care of. We evaluated our approach on a set of 27 benchmarks. So most of them I covered in the examples, and actually you also saw in the first talk. The synthesis time is very, very, very small. So it's up to 10 seconds to synthesize the parallel permutation. We have two case studies. So the first case study is actually running the serial code and comparing it to the parallel code on the laptop. So with 8 hyper-threaded machine and and hundreds of gigabytes roughly files, so we achieved up to 5x speed up, which is we consider a reasonable result. The second set of experiments is actually data center experiment. So the translations of our parallel programs, the ones which cover no prefix scenario, so they will translate it to the Hadoop jobs and we'll evaluate it on the Amazon AWS web service. So for the input files of 200 gigabytes, we achieved linear speed up, and well, should mention the 10 nodes cluster. As a related work, it's quite important to mention that same type of parallelism was considered in the paper of Maaz and Raichev and co-authors in SOSP 2015. So this paper doesn't consider any synthesis. It's not a synthesis paper. What they did, they ran symbolic execution of their code and applied it to the concrete pieces of data. That's why they were constructing the summaries, and they were using the summaries for parallel computation. So our approach in constant contrast doesn't depend on any data. So our code is good as is. So we just run it for one piece of data and for another piece of data. It's reusable. Nowadays, it's quite popular to run synthesis by examples using the PBE approach. So in last year, PLDI, there was a paper about MapReduce synthesis by program by example. So our work is, well, orthogonal because, well, we don't need any examples, and if our horn system is satisfiable, then we guarantee that for any example we are done. Well, very related work. First talk this session. I hope you still remember the main, to my understanding, that many differences, but to my understanding, the most one is that we use horn solving. It's very, very, very interesting idea. And finally, again, in the level of horn solving, there's a nice paper this year, LPAR, by Dmitry Mordvinov and myself, that actually looked at the systems of horn solving and like the system you saw in the previous slide, and making them much easier to solve for the existing solvers. It's a horn clause-based transformation that, in some cases, from unsolvable system resulted to a solvable system. So very interesting work. I encourage you to take a look. To conclude, I presented you a way to parallelize programs by synthesizing them based on the sequential implementation. So we gradually consider the 3 parallelization scenarios, and we try to achieve the most simple solution as fast as possible. It's template-based synthesis. We contribute the libraries of templates, so it's also certified using constraint horn solving. So it doesn't depend on any bound. Any big data can be used can be used by the parallel programs. So we extensively evaluated on C++ code and Hadoop code. And this is it. Thank you for your attention.
All right, we have quite a bit of time for questions.
Did you find programs that this doesn't work for the synthesis approach, and could you characterize the classes of programs this is not appropriate for?
Sure. Well, there are many programs that do not just require several passes over the same array, for instance. Or there are programs that take 2 arrays as inputs and just do some computation, computing pairwise sums, for instance. So those, in principle, could be supported because, as you see in the picture, there's a gradual approach. So it's extensible by new parallelization strategies that potentially can take set 2 inputs, for instance, or do something else with the input.
So it seems like one of the key things that you use in order to make this work is you have this rich library of templates that help you give structure to the parallel implementation. How rich is this library? Is it the case that you sort of have a different...
It's good enough to cover all cases in our evaluation. Well, and all similar cases that we avoided because of similarities.
Well, so I guess the annoying question to ask there is it the case that you're just sort of like specializing templates for the benchmarks that you have, and so that's why this worked, or?
Well, that's how we started our work. We started on particular examples, and we figured out that those libraries actually fine for the others.
So it is the case that you have sort of a set of templates, and then you come up with new examples, and it turns out to be...
They also extendable actually because the system designer.
I've got another couple more questions, but let me ask at least one of them. So in the first talk, which sort of parallelized in a similar way, one of the key things was that the synthesized merge function was associative, and so there were no restrictions on how on the order in which you did the merges, right? So you could sort of have a balanced tree, you could do a left-biased reduction, or whatever. Are the merges that you synthesize associative, or do they require a left or right reduction?
We don't require it actually. In principle, we can add additional constraints to the query to make it associative, but we just didn't find it useful for our set of experiments. In principle, it would be nice to actually try it to do.
Right. I guess it's not so much about whether it's useful, because making them associative makes it more restrictive, but it would potentially, especially as you scale up, can help with bottlenecks because you can now do a parallel reduction.
Since our synthesis is bounded, maybe it doesn't actually lead to big problems in the performance.
Nice talk. I had a question about the verification side. You mentioned something about the bounded number of threads. I guess part of my question was just answered. It's not, okay. That you're not considering associativity.
Yes.
But still, it just seems like you should be able to just do this for 2 threads and use some sort of meta-induction argument or something like that, that you don't have to really do this exactly for this number of threads that is going to be used after. So I'm just wondering whether you thought about or
Well, first of all, about just the comment about bounded number of threads. So in principle, if you use a theory of arrays, here we can make it unbounded. But for solving for theory of arrays, it's kind of challenging. So, and this system actually, despite it looks complex, is actually reducible to linear arithmetic, and it can be solved in a couple of seconds. That's why we actually bounded it. But it's typically not really the performance typically doesn't so much depend on this bound. It's not exponential in this case. Regarding associativity, well, I probably missed your point, but again, given this setup, it's actually not required here. Yeah, if you can repeat the question maybe again. And,
so I cannot follow the technical detail of synthesis, but how essential is gradual synthesis for parallelizing code? So just an application, or this is essential for parallelizing?
Well, I believe it's essential for any software development process because, well, as a developer, as a human, what you do, you try the simple solution first. If it works, you're done. You don't want to overcomplicate things. Then if it doesn't work, you refine and you just try to more complicated strategy. So it's gradual in this sense. So we try the simple solution, try to find a simple solution. If it doesn't work, we try to find more complicated solution. And gradual also in the case that we're reusing things, we're using templates, and well, we try to move it like step by step, more complicated, more complicated, more complicated.
Is it maybe better to think of that as just a priority order in how you try the templates, or are you getting information from one?
Priority order, yeah. Right.
So it's not like you're necessarily getting information from the first attempt and using it in the second attempt?
No,
Okay.
not in this sense.
Any other questions? Okay, we're running a couple of minutes ahead of schedule, but I think that given how difficult it is to move between rooms anyway, we might as well go ahead and move on to the next speaker. Let's thank Grigory again.